At 72, my own son screamed, "Get out, you useless burden," and threw me into a raging blizzard, believing his greedy wife's terrible lie. They were sure I'd vanish forever. 4 hours later, his phone rang. It was the police. When he stepped into my hospital room and saw me alive, his face twisted in horror. "This can't be true." Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is in your region right now. My name is Porter McDonald. I'm 72 years old, and I live in a house worth $2.3 million in Cherry Creek, Denver, Colorado. Spent 35 years as a federal judge before retirement. I always believed that the law exists to protect people from their worst instincts. Turns out, sometimes those worst instincts come from the people who share your blood. The house has been unusually crowded for the past 8 months. My son Brandon and his wife Kimberly moved in temporarily after what Brandon called a rough patch financially. He's 44, sells luxury cars at a Mercedes dealership, and apparently got himself into debt deep enough that they couldn't afford their apartment anymore. Kimberly is 39, calls herself a social media influencer, though I've never quite understood what she influences besides Brandon's increasingly poor decisions. I remember when Brandon was 7 years old, running to greet me when I came home from court, his little face bright with excitement. "Dad! Dad! Can we play chess?" He loved that game back then, wanted to think 3 moves ahead, just like his old man. Now, when I look at him, I see a stranger wearing my son's face. The change didn't happen overnight. It started about 3 years ago when he met Kimberly at some charity gala. She was beautiful, charming, exactly the kind of person who knows how to wear a smile like armor. Within 6 months, they were married. Within a year, Brandon stopped calling me unless he needed something. But I'm not a fool. 35 years on the bench taught me to recognize patterns, to notice the small details that don't quite fit. The way conversations stop abruptly when I enter a room. The way Kimberly's eyes linger on the artwork in the hallway, the antique furniture calculating their worth. 3 weeks ago, I caught her in my study, rifling through papers on my desk. She smiled that practiced smile and said she was looking for a pen. There were 6 pens in the cup right next to her. Then there's Brandon, asking about my will with forced casualness. "Just curious, Dad. Making sure everything's in order." The third time he brought it up, I knew something was brewing. When you've sentenced hundreds of criminals, you develop a sixth sense for when someone's plotting something they shouldn't. The snowstorm started early on the morning of January 15th. By noon, the Weather Service was calling it the worst blizzard Denver had seen in a decade. Wind howling like something alive and angry, snow piling up against the windows in drifts that reached the second-floor ledges. I was in my study, pretending to read a book on antique legal documents, when I heard voices from upstairs. Their bedroom door wasn't completely closed. Kimberly's voice carried down the hallway, sharp with impatience. "We can't wait any longer. He's healthier than men 20 years younger. What if he lives another 10 years? I'm not spending another decade playing the dutiful daughter-in-law." Brandon's response was quieter, uncertain. "But what if something goes wrong?" "Nothing will go wrong if you grow a spine for once in your life." Her voice dripped with contempt. "The old man trusts you completely. He won't suspect a thing." I stood very still, my hand frozen on the book's spine. My own son, planning something against me. The words echoed in my head, but some part of me had been expecting this. Maybe that's why it didn't hurt as much as it should have. Or maybe 35 years of hearing the worst humanity has to offer had made me numb to betrayal. I went back to my study and sat at my desk. Outside, the snow fell in thick curtains of white. I thought about the GPS tracker in my jacket pocket, the one I'd purchased 3 months ago when I first noticed the pattern of hushed conversations and suddenly locked doors. I thought about the hidden cameras I'd had installed throughout the house, small as shirt buttons, recording everything. In Colorado, it's perfectly legal to record on your own property, one of the laws I'd helped interpret in 1998. That evening, Kimberly did something she hadn't done in 8 months. She cooked dinner, actually stood in my kitchen and prepared a meal from scratch. "I thought we should have a nice family dinner," she said, her smile warm and convincing. "With this storm, we're all stuck inside together. Might as well make the best of it." Brandon looked uncomfortable, wouldn't meet my eyes. That told me everything I needed to know. The pot roast smelled delicious. Kimberly had even made my favorite sides, mashed potatoes with extra butter, the way I liked them. She served me a generous portion, her movements graceful and practiced. "You've been so good to us letting us stay here," she said. "We really appreciate it." I took a bite, then another. The food tasted fine, normal. But about 15 minutes after I finished eating, a wave of dizziness hit me like a physical blow. The room tilted sideways. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to focus, but my vision was blurring at the edges. "Dad, you okay?" Brandon's voice sounded far away, tinny. I tried to stand, but my legs weren't receiving signals from my brain anymore. The last thing I remember before everything went black was Kimberly's face, watching me with cold calculation and thinking, Zapiclone. She used Zapiclone. The prescription sleep aid, fast-acting, leaves the system within 24 hours. Clever girl. Too clever for her own good. When you spend decades as a federal judge, you learn to recognize the exact moment when someone crosses the line from thinking about a crime to actually committing it. That moment, when thought becomes action, when the point of no return passes. I just never thought I'd see it in my own son's eyes. I came to consciousness slowly, my mind clawing its way up through layers of chemical fog. Cold. That was the first sensation. Bitter, bone-deep cold seeping through my clothes. Then movement, the rumble of an engine, the slight sway that meant I was in a vehicle. My eyelids felt weighted, but I forced them open just a crack. Darkness outside the windows. Snow streaming past in the headlights. I was in the back seat of a car. My car, I realized, recognizing the leather interior. Brandon was driving. I could see the back of his head, his shoulders tense, hands gripping the wheel too tight. For a moment, a flash of memory hit me, teaching him to drive when he was 16. "Easy on the brakes, son. Smooth movements. Always think ahead." He'd been so eager to learn back then, hung on my every word. When did that eager boy become this stranger? I kept my breathing shallow and regular, my body limp. Years of cross-examining witnesses taught me the value of gathering information before revealing what you know. Through half-closed eyes, I watched the road signs slip past. We were heading west on Highway 285, away from Denver, into the mountains. Each mile marker took us further from civilization. The storm was getting worse. Snow pelted the windshield in thick waves. Brandon hunched forward, peering through the white curtain. His phone rang. He answered on speaker. "Is it done?" Kimberly's voice sharp with anxiety. "Almost there," Brandon said. His voice shook slightly. "You remember the spot? The old logging trail 47 miles out?" I remember. No cameras out there. No witnesses. The storm will cover everything. They won't find him until spring, if at all. Pause. "You can do this, baby. Think about what we're getting. 2.3 million for the house alone, plus his bank accounts, his retirement funds, everything. We'll finally be free." Free. The word twisted something in my chest. Free from what? From me? The father who gave them a roof, food, asked nothing in return except basic respect? The car slowed, turned onto a narrow side road. Trees pressed close on both sides, their branches heavy with snow. Brandon drove another 10 minutes, then stopped. He sat there for a long moment, engine idling, staring straight ahead. "Come on," he muttered to himself. "You can do this. You have to do this." He got out, came around to the back door and opened it. Frigid air rushed in, stealing my breath. He grabbed my arm and pulled. I let myself be dead weight, limbs unresponsive. He dragged me out of the car and I fell onto the snow, the cold shocking even through my clothes. The temperature had to be well below zero, maybe -12, -15 Celsius. Brandon stood over me, breath coming in white clouds. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said, but his voice was flat, rehearsed. "This is your fault, really. If you'd just died naturally, none of this would be necessary." I let my eyes flutter open, met his gaze. He flinched, stepped back. "Brandon," I managed to whisper, my tongue thick from the drugs. "Please." His face hardened. "Get out of here, you useless burden. This is your end, old man." He kicked snow at me, his voice rising to a shout. "You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to spend my life waiting for you to die so I could finally have what should have been mine years ago?" I tried to speak again, but he cut me off. Mom's not here to protect you anymore. She's not here to tell me what a good man you are, how much you sacrificed. You're nobody's hero. You're just in the way. His voice cracked on the last word. He stood there for another 5 seconds, looking down at me. I thought I saw something flicker in his eyes, some last remnant of the boy who used to bring me drawings from school, who used to tell me I was his hero. But then it was gone, buried under desperation and greed and Kimberly's poisonous influence. Brandon turned, got back in the car, and drove away. The taillights disappeared into the swirling snow, and I was alone. The cold was immediate and vicious. Wind cut through my clothes like knives. My fingers were already going numb. In these conditions, hypothermia would set in within 20 minutes. Death would follow, not long after. That's what they were counting on. But I hadn't been a federal judge for 35 years by being unprepared. 3 months ago, when I first noticed Kimberly's calculated glances and Brandon's nervous questions, I'd started taking precautions. Not because I wanted to believe my own son would try to kill me, because I knew people, knew what desperation and greed could drive them to do. With shaking hands, I reached into my inner jacket pocket. The GPS beacon was right where I'd put it that morning, along with my phone in a waterproof case. My fingers were clumsy with cold, but I managed to activate the beacon. The tiny light blinked red. Then I pulled out the phone and dialed 911. 911. What's your emergency? Attempted murder, I said, my voice slurring from the drugs and cold. Abandoned. Highway 285. GPS signal. The phone slipped from my fingers into the snow. The world was getting hazy again, darkness creeping in from the edges. I thought about Brandon at 7 years old, how he'd cried when he lost his first chess game to me. It's okay to lose, son, I told him. It's how you learn to win. I thought about Kimberly, her beautiful face and ugly soul. I thought about how I'd spent 3 months documenting their every conversation, their every scheme, building a case the way I'd built hundreds of cases before. The cold didn't hurt anymore. That was a bad sign. Hypothermia's final stage, when the body stops fighting, when dying feels like falling asleep. Some distant part of my mind calculated, core temperature dropping, organs shutting down, maybe 30 minutes left, maybe less. But I'd made one critical miscalculation in my life, and I wouldn't make it twice. I'd calculated that my son still had some decency left, some line he wouldn't cross. I was wrong about that. But he'd calculated that I was just a helpless old man, unprepared and naive. He was wrong about that. In the distance, I heard sirens, getting closer. The GPS beacon must have transmitted my location. I closed my eyes and let the darkness take me. But this time it was different. This time I was falling toward something instead of away from it, toward survival, toward revenge, toward the moment when I would look my son in the eyes and show him exactly what happens when you try to outmaneuver someone who spent 35 years mastering the art of justice. The last thought I had before consciousness left me. Checkmate, Brandon. You just don't know it yet. I woke up to the steady beep of monitors and the antiseptic smell of hospital air. Swedish Medical Center, according to the chart at the foot of my bed. My body felt like it had been dragged through broken glass, every muscle protesting the slightest movement. An IV drip fed fluids into my arm. Warming blankets covered me, fighting the deep chill that had settled into my bones. The clock on the wall read 3:47 in the morning. A nurse appeared, her expression shifting from routine check to genuine relief when she saw my eyes open. Mr. McDonald, welcome back. You gave us quite a scare. Your core temperature was down to 32 degrees Celsius when they brought you in. Another 30 minutes and... She didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. How long? My voice came out as a rasp. About 4 hours since the paramedics found you. The police want to speak with you when you're ready. There's a Detective Coleman waiting outside. 4 hours. That meant Brandon and Kimberly had been back home for at least 2 hours, maybe 3. Right now, they were probably celebrating, thinking they'd won, thinking the old man was gone for good. The mental image would have been amusing if my ribs didn't hurt so much when I breathed. Detective Lisa Coleman entered the room 10 minutes later. Mid-30s, sharp eyes that missed nothing, The kind of cop who actually read the case files instead of skimming them. She introduced herself, pulled up a chair, and got straight to business. "Mr. McDonald, can you tell me what happened tonight?" I told her everything. The overheard conversation, the drug dinner, waking up in the car, Brandon abandoning me in the snow. I kept my voice steady, factual, the way I used to present evidence in court. No emotion, just facts. Facts were harder to dispute. She took notes, asked clarifying questions. "You said you activated a GPS beacon? You were carrying that with you intentionally?" "I was. I've suspected something like this might happen for the past 3 months." Her eyebrow raised. "And you didn't report your suspicions to police?" "Would you have arrested them based on suspicious behavior and overheard conversations?" I needed evidence. Real evidence. The kind that holds up in court. I met her gaze. "I was a federal judge for 35 years, Detective. I know how this works." She studied me for a long moment. "Your son and daughter-in-law are on their way here. I called them an hour ago, told them you'd been found alive. They sounded surprised. I imagine they did." The look she gave me was knowing. "We found traces of Zopiclone in your blood work. That's a prescription sedative. We also found an empty bottle of the same medication in your son's vehicle, along with your wallet and keys." "He's going to have a hard time explaining that away." "I'm sure he'll try." My chest felt tight, but not from the cold this time, from the weight of what was coming. "Detective, I need to ask you something. Can you give me 48 hours before filing formal charges?" She frowned. "That's an unusual request, Mr. McDonald. This is attempted murder we're talking about." "I understand. But I have a better solution than prison. Trust me on this. I've spent most of my adult life putting criminals away. Sometimes the law isn't quite creative enough for certain situations." She considered this, then nodded slowly. 48 hours. But if they try to flee or destroy evidence, all bets are off. They won't flee. They think they still have a chance to talk their way out of this. Brandon and Kimberly arrived 20 minutes later. I heard them in the hallway first, Kimberly's voice high with false concern. "Is he going to be okay?" "Oh, this is terrible. We were so worried when we couldn't find him." They stepped into the room together, and I watched their faces carefully. Brandon looked pale, shaken, eyes darting around like a trapped animal. Kimberly had composed herself better, wearing an expression of practiced worry. But I'd spent 3.5 decades reading people's faces, learning to spot the lie beneath the mask. Brandon approached the bed hesitantly. "Dad, we've been so worried. When we woke up and you weren't in the house, we didn't know what happened. We called everyone, looked everywhere." I let him talk, let him spin his story. Then, when he finally ran out of words, I spoke quietly. "This can't be true. I was supposed to disappear forever, wasn't I?" The color drained from his face completely. Kimberly's practiced expression faltered. I smiled. Not a warm smile. The kind of smile a predator gives its prey right before the kill. "I heard everything, son. Every single word. The conversation in your bedroom this morning. The phone call on the drive. 2.3 million for the house alone, plus his bank accounts, his retirement funds, everything." Ring any bells? Brandon's mouth opened and closed without sound. Kimberly recovered faster. "He's confused, Brandon? The hypothermia? The trauma? He doesn't know what he's saying." "Oh, I know exactly what I'm saying. I also know about the Zopiclone in the pot roast." Clever choice, Kimberly. Fast-acting, mostly out of the system within a day. Almost untraceable. Except they drew blood when I arrived. Funny how evidence works. Detective Coleman chose that moment to enter. "Mr. Brandon McDonald, Mrs. Kimberly McDonald, I need you both to come down to the station to answer some questions. We've found evidence in your vehicle that requires explanation." Watching them led away was instructive. Brandon looked like he might vomit. Kimberly's mask had cracked completely, her eyes now calculating, already working on her next move. They thought this was over. They thought they'd either talk their way out, or that I'd be too weak, too traumatized to pursue charges. They had no idea what was coming. After they left, I lay back against the pillows and closed my eyes. My body hurt, but my mind was crystal clear. For 3 months, I'd been gathering evidence, documenting their schemes, preparing for the moment when they'd finally make their move. Now that moment had passed, and I was still breathing, still thinking, still several moves ahead on the board. The nurse came back to check my vitals. "Your son and daughter-in-law seem very upset," she said, adjusting my IV. "I imagine they are," I replied, "though probably not for the reasons you think." She gave me a puzzled look, but didn't press. After she left, I stared at the ceiling tiles and thought about next steps. Prison was the obvious answer. Attempted murder carried serious time in Colorado, especially with premeditation. But prison was too simple, too clean. They'd serve their time, get out eventually, probably blame me for ruining their lives. No. What they needed was something more poetic, something that would teach them exactly what it feels like to lose everything you've spent months scheming to obtain, to have it right in your grasp, to taste victory, and then watch it dissolve like snow in summer heat. I'd spent 35 years administering justice from behind a bench. Now it was time to administer it from the other side, and unlike them, I actually knew what I was doing. They released Brandon and Kimberly the next morning on a no-travel order, pending further investigation. Detective Coleman called to inform me, her tone suggesting she had her own opinions about that decision. "The DA thinks there's not quite enough for immediate charges yet. The Zopiclone bottle doesn't have a prescription label, and your son claims he found you wandering outside, confused, and was trying to drive you to the hospital when his car got stuck. He says you must have taken the medication yourself by mistake." "Creative," I said, "and completely false. I know that, and you know that. But we need more. The GPS data from your beacon helps, but a good defense attorney could argue you called for help yourself after getting lost. We need something ironclad. You'll have it. Give me those 48 hours. The following morning, a lawyer named Robert Stanley arrived at my hospital room. Mid-50s, sharp suit, sharper mind. I'd looked him up online the night before, reviewed his cases, specialized in estate law and fraud. Perfect for what I had in mind. "Mr. McDonald, you said on the phone you needed help with a complex legal matter." He pulled up a chair, opened his briefcase. Professional, efficient. "I do. 30 years ago, I helped write amendments to Colorado's inheritance fraud statutes. I know every loophole in that law. More importantly, I know how to close them." His interest visibly sharpened. "Go on." I laid it out for him, the hidden cameras I'd installed 3 months ago throughout my house. In Colorado, it's perfectly legal to record on your own property, without consent. The cameras were small, professional grade, positioned in the living room, kitchen, study, and hallway. Over the past 90 days, they'd captured hours of footage. Brandon and Kimberly discussing plans to wait for the old man to die, Kimberly researching how to contest a will, Brandon making phone calls to real estate appraisers to value the house. "I have everything documented," I told Stanley. "Dates, times, conversations. They've been planning this for months. The attempted murder was just them getting impatient." "That's solid evidence for a criminal case," Stanley said. "But you said you wanted something more than prison time?" "I want them to lose everything they were trying to steal. But more than that, I want them to think they've won first. Let them taste victory, then pull it away." I pulled out a folder I'd had the nurse fetch from my belongings. "Here's my current will, dated 2 years ago. Leaves everything to Brandon. I want to create a new one, properly notarized, leaving everything to charity. But I'm going to leave a copy of the old will where they'll find it." Stanley smiled slowly. "So they think they're still inheriting." "Exactly. But here's the twist. I'm also going to tell them I'm selling the house, moving into assisted living, putting the property on the market in 2 months, which will panic them into action. They'll try to stop the sale, probably through fraud, forging documents, maybe trying to have me declared mentally incompetent. And every step they take, every document they forge, every scheme they attempt, will be recorded and documented. By the time we're done, we won't just have attempted murder. We'll have a pattern of fraud, conspiracy, forgery. Enough to ensure they spend the next decade or more in prison, not just a few years." Stanley leaned back, studying me with something like respect. "You're not just looking for justice. You're building a comprehensive case that will destroy any chance they have at a defense." "I prefer to think of it as being thorough. I want them to have every opportunity to demonstrate their true character, to remove any possibility that a jury might feel sympathy for them. We spent the next 3 hours going over details. Stanley would create the false will and the real one. The real one would go to a notary named Jennifer Richards, whose reputation was impeccable. The false one would be left in my study, just visible enough that Kimberly would find it during one of her snooping sessions. "What about the house sale?" Stanley asked. "Are you actually planning to sell, or is that just bait?" "It's bait, but it needs to be convincing. Can you recommend a real estate agent who'll play along?" "I know someone. She's worked with me on complex estate cases before. She'll list the property, make it look legitimate, but the actual sale won't go through unless you want it to." I checked out of the hospital 2 days after being admitted. Brandon and Kimberly picked me up, their faces masks of concern. The drive home was quiet, awkward. I sat in the back seat, the same position I'd been in when Brandon drove me out to die, and watched their reflections in the rearview mirror. Back at the house, I called them into the living room. Time for Act 1 of this performance. "I've been thinking," I said slowly, letting my voice sound tired, defeated, about what happened, about the hypothermia, getting lost in the storm. I'm getting old. Maybe I'm not capable of living alone anymore. Kimberly jumped in immediately. "Oh, Porter, don't say that. You're fine. It was just a terrible accident." "Was it?" I looked directly at Brandon. "Or am I becoming a burden you'd rather not deal with?" His face went pale. "Dad, no, that's not. We love having you here." "Do you?" I let the question hang for a moment. "Well, regardless, I've decided I'm not pressing charges about the other night. The police want me to, but you're my only family. Brandon, you're my son. I'm disappointed in some choices you've made, but I'm not going to send you to prison." The relief in their faces was almost comical. Kimberly actually teared up. "Thank you. You don't know how much that means to us." "But," I continued, "I think it's time I moved into assisted living. This house is too much for me to manage. I'm putting it on the market. The realtor will list it in 2 weeks." The relief evaporated instantly. Brandon's voice came out strangled. "You're selling the house?" "I need the money for medical care for the facility. These places aren't cheap. The house should fetch around $2.3 million. That'll cover my care for the rest of my life." I watched Kimberly's mind work, saw the calculations behind her eyes. If I sold now, spent the money on care, there'd be nothing left for them to inherit. Everything they'd planned for, dreamed about, would vanish. "But Dad," Brandon said desperately, "this is our family home, where I grew up. You can't just sell it." "It's my house, Brandon. My name on the deed. My decision." I stood up slowly, playing the frail old man. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm tired. Nearly freezing to death takes it out of you." I walked to my study, closed the door, and sat at my desk. On the hidden monitor connected to the cameras throughout the house, I watched Brandon and Kimberly immediately huddled together in the living room, their voices low and urgent. "We have to do something," Kimberly hissed. "If he sells now, we get nothing." "What can we do? It's his house." "There are ways. Power of attorney declaring him mentally incompetent. He almost died out there, Brandon. We can argue he's not capable of making sound decisions. We can stop this sale." I smiled, watching them plot. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. Every word recorded, time-stamped, stored safely in a cloud server they didn't know existed. Let them scheme. Let them plan. Let them think they were clever enough to outmaneuver a federal judge with 35 years of experience putting people exactly like them behind bars. Because this time, I wasn't bound by procedure or precedent or the limitations of the bench. This time I was playing chess without rules, and they didn't even realize the game had started. And that's when I understood exactly how to repay them. Not with swift justice, but with slow, methodical destruction. One carefully planned move at a time. The next morning I performed my first deliberate act of theater. I left the fake will on my desk, positioned just so. Not obvious, but visible enough that Kimberly's naturally snooping nature would find it. The document looked authentic because it was authentic from 2 years ago, before I'd realized the depths of their greed. It left everything to Brandon. Every asset, every account, the house, all of it. I went downstairs for breakfast, moving slowly, keeping up the appearance of a man recovering from trauma. Brandon was already in the kitchen, scrolling through his phone with the distracted air of someone whose mind was elsewhere. Kimberly joined us 20 minutes later, bright and cheerful, playing the concerned daughter-in-law to perfection. "How did you sleep, Porter?" she asked, pouring coffee with practiced grace. "Well enough. Still sore, though. Everything aches." I made a show of rubbing my shoulder. "Getting old is not for the faint of heart." "You're not old," she said automatically. "You're just recovering. You'll be back to normal in no time." Back to normal. As if there was a normal to return to. As if we hadn't crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I nodded and sipped my coffee, watching them both over the rim of my cup. Brandon wouldn't meet my eyes. Guilt, probably. Or fear. Maybe both. I excused myself after breakfast, citing fatigue. Back in my study, I pulled up the camera feeds on my laptop. Sure enough, within 30 minutes, Kimberly was at my door, knocking softly. When I didn't answer, I'd moved to the upstairs guest room. She entered anyway. The camera captured everything in perfect detail, her eyes scanning the room, landing on the desk, spotting the document. She moved closer, read the first page, then pulled out her phone and photographed every single page. 7 minutes, start to finish. Then she carefully replaced the will exactly where she'd found it. I watched from upstairs, a smile playing at my lips. Check. That evening, I overheard them talking in their bedroom. The cameras picked up every word. "It's real," Kimberly said, her voice tight with excitement. "Dated 2 years ago. Everything goes to Brandon. The house, his retirement accounts, investments, everything. We're talking at least $3 million total." "But he said he's selling the house," Brandon protested. "He hasn't sold it yet. And if we play this right, he won't. Not before." She trailed off, but the implication hung heavy in the air. A week passed. I played my role perfectly. The aging, slightly confused father, occasionally forgetting small things, moving a bit slower each day. Not enough to be obvious, just enough to plant seeds, to make them think that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't quite as sharp as I used to be. On the 7th day after finding the will, I called them down for another family meeting. Time to tighten the noose. "I've been thinking about the house sale," I said, watching their faces closely. "About timing. I've decided to list it 2 weeks from now. I want to be settled in my new place by spring." The panic in Brandon's eyes was immediate. Kimberly controlled herself better, but I saw her fingers tighten on her coffee cup. "That's very soon," she said carefully. "Are you sure you want to rush this? It's a big decision." "I'm 72 years old. I don't have time to waste." I let my voice crack slightly, playing the elderly card. "Besides, the realtor says the market's good right now. Houses in Cherry Creek are selling fast. Have you thought about what happens with your affairs? Your will, your accounts?" Brandon's voice was too casual, the question too calculated. "My will is in order. Been that way for 2 years. Everything's arranged exactly how I want it." I looked directly at him. "When I'm gone, you'll be taken care of. That document in my study drawer says so." I watched Kimberly's expression shift. Relief mixed with something darker. They thought I was telling them I knew they'd seen the will, that I was giving them permission to expect their inheritance. Perfect. The following day, I went to the bank, withdrew $5,700 in cash. Unusual enough that Brandon, who still checked my credit card statements online, I'd never removed his access, would notice. Let him wonder what the money was for. Let them both wonder. That night, I planted another seed. "I'm meeting with someone tomorrow," I mentioned over dinner. "A specialist, to discuss my options." "What kind of specialist?" Kimberly asked too quickly. "Someone who helps people like me, with planning, with transitions." I kept it vague, watched confusion bloom on their faces. Were they thinking lawyer, financial planner, medical professional? The cameras caught their conversation that night. Kimberly was pacing, agitated. "He's moving too fast. If he sells before we can do anything, we lose everything. The will doesn't matter if all the money goes to paying for some expensive nursing home." "What are you suggesting?" Brandon's voice was hesitant. "We need to stop the sale." "Take control of the situation? How?" "Power of attorney. If we can prove he's not mentally competent to make these decisions, we can manage his affairs. Stop the sale. Keep the house. preserve the assets until... Until what, Kimberly? She didn't answer directly. We need documentation, medical records showing cognitive decline. Maybe have him evaluated by someone who'll say what we need them to say. That's fraud. That's survival. Her voice turned hard. We've come too far to back out now, Brandon. He almost didn't survive that night in the snow. If we'd been just a little more patient, we wouldn't need any of this. But here we are. So we adapt. We do what's necessary. I sat in my study, watching this unfold, and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. They were walking exactly where I wanted them to walk, every step deeper into the trap. 2 days later, I received a visit from a man I'd never met, Marcus Wade, though he introduced himself as Scott Morrison, notary public. He was actually a con artist with 4 prior convictions, currently out on parole. Robert Stanley had found him through a private investigator, then engineered a chance meeting between Wade and one of Kimberly's social media friends who'd mentioned knowing a notary who worked flexibly with documents. The seed had been planted, watered, and was now bearing fruit. Kimberly contacted Morrison 3 days later. I knew because I'd given Stanley permission to monitor her calls through legal channels. She met with him at a coffee shop downtown. The cameras at home captured her return, the whispered conversation with Brandon. He can do it. For $3,500, he'll create documentation that Porter's mentally incompetent, medical assessments, cognitive tests, the works. Make it look official enough that we can petition for power of attorney. Is it safe? Brandon asked. He's done it before. Says it's foolproof. Nothing is foolproof when you're dealing with an actual fool, I thought, watching them. But let them believe it. 4 days later, they paid Morrison his fee. I watched the bank withdrawal on Brandon's account, $3,500 in cash. Watched them hand it over to Wade in a parking garage, the exchange captured on the security cameras Stanley had arranged to have positioned there. Wade, of course, immediately reported the transaction to Stanley, as agreed. The man was earning a lighter sentence with every piece of evidence he helped create. The forged documents arrived a week later. Kimberly brought them home, hidden in her purse, showed them to Brandon in their bedroom. Medical assessments claiming I'd shown signs of dementia, cognitive decline, inability to manage complex decisions, all beautifully fabricated, completely illegal. Now we just need to file with the court, Kimberly said. Get the power of attorney approved. Once we have that, we can stop the house sale, manage his accounts, everything. He'll fight it, Brennan said. Let him try. We have medical documentation. He's a confused old man who almost died wandering around in a snowstorm. Who's the court going to believe? I turned off the monitor and leaned back in my chair. The trap was set. The bait taken. Now came the waiting. 3 weeks after I'd announced the house sale, Kimberly and Brandon made their move. They filed papers with the county court requesting emergency conservatorship based on my alleged mental incompetence. Attached were Morrison's forged medical documents, along with a petition to halt any sale of my property pending a competency hearing. Robert Stanley called me when the papers were filed. They've committed, he said simply. Multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. The fake notary, the false medical documents, the attempt to gain control of your assets through deception. We have them. Not yet, I said. We're still building. Let's see how far they'll go. The competency hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, Stanley put the next phase in motion. A buyer emerged from my house, Mountain Trust LLC, a company that had been incorporated exactly 3 weeks prior. Stanley had created it using a friend's law firm as a registered agent. It looked completely legitimate. Business license, articles of incorporation, everything filed properly with the Colorado Secretary of State. Mountain Trust offered $2.1 million for the house, below market value by $200,000, positioned as a quick cash sale. The kind of offer that a desperate seller might accept that would alarm potential heirs who saw their inheritance evaporating. I played my part, accepted the offer immediately, citing the need for quick funds to secure my place at an assisted living facility. The real estate agent, Stanley's contact, playing along perfectly, drew up the contracts. Brandon and Kimberly received copies as interested parties. I've never seen 2 people panic quite so beautifully. The cameras captured Brandon reading the contract, his face going from normal to pale to nearly gray in the space of 15 seconds. His hands started shaking. He set the papers down, picked them up again, read them once more as if hoping the words would change. They didn't. 2.1 million, he said, his voice hollow. Below market. He's practically giving it away. Kimberly snatched the papers from him, scanned them with eyes that had gone hard and cold. He's doing this on purpose. He knows we're trying to stop him, so he's rushing the sale. The hearing is in 3 weeks. Can the sale go through before then? If both parties want it fast enough, yes. She threw the papers on their bed. We need to accelerate everything. File for emergency conservatorship. Claim he's endangering his own financial welfare by accepting such a low offer. Make the judge see he's incompetent. They went back to Morrison. Paid him another $4,200, I knew because Stanley's investigator had Wade-wired by this point, to rush additional documentation. More fake medical reports, this time claiming I'd shown signs of severe cognitive impairment, that I'd been observed making irrational financial decisions. The preliminary hearing arrived. I sat in the courtroom playing the confused elderly man, while Brandon and Kimberly's lawyer, Derek Hughes, a third-rate attorney who specialized in quick conservatorship cases, presented their evidence, the forged medical documents, testimony about my near-death experience in the snowstorm, claims that I was acting irrationally by selling my home below market value. Judge Patricia Martinez, a woman I'd never met but whose reputation for thoroughness was well known, reviewed the documents carefully. Mr. McDonald, you understand that your son and daughter-in-law are petitioning to manage your affairs, that they're claiming you're not competent to make these decisions yourself? I understand, I said, my voice steady, and I'd like to oppose this petition. I'm of sound mind, Your Honor. I know exactly what I'm doing. Then why are you selling your house for $200,000 below market value? Because I want a quick sale. I don't want to wait months while it sits on the market. I'd rather have the money now and get settled. I paused. Is there a law against that, Your Honor? She studied me for a long moment. No, there's no law against accepting a lower offer, though it does seem unusual. She looked at the medical documents. I'm going to order an independent evaluation. Dr. Sarah Chen, a neuropsychologist with the county, will assess Mr. McDonald's cognitive function. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks with her findings. Hughes objected. Your Honor, that's 2 weeks Mr. McDonald has to complete this sale and dissipate his assets. Then file a motion for a temporary restraining order on the sale, Martinez said dryly. But given that Mr. McDonald appears quite lucid in this courtroom, I'm not issuing any orders until I have independent medical evidence. The restraining order was filed the next day. The sale was frozen pending the outcome of the evaluation. Brandon and Kimberly thought they'd won a victory. I let them think it. Dr. Chen evaluated me 3 days later. 2 hours of cognitive tests, memory assessments, logical reasoning. She was thorough, professional, and clearly puzzled. Mr. McDonald, your cognitive function is excellent, she said at the end of the session. Your memory, reasoning, decision-making capabilities are all well within normal ranges for your age. Actually, above normal. You scored better on some of these tests than many people 20 years younger. So you'll tell the judge I'm competent? I'll tell the judge that I found no evidence of cognitive decline whatsoever. These medical reports submitted by your son, she tapped the forged documents, they don't match my findings at all. In fact, some of the tests they claim to have administered don't even exist. The terminology is wrong. This looks like it was written by someone who Googled dementia symptoms and strung together medical-sounding words. Interesting, I said mildly. Mr. McDonald, are you aware that these documents might be fraudulent? I had my suspicions, Doctor. She studied me with new eyes. You're playing a game here, aren't you? I'm defending myself, Doctor. There's a difference. The follow-up hearing was scheduled a week later. In the meantime, Stanley put the final piece in place. Mountain Trust LLC indicated it was willing to wait for the court's decision, but it submitted all its paperwork for the purchase. Proof of funds, corporate documents, everything. Brandon and Kimberly's attorney reviewed those documents, looking for any weakness. Found nothing because everything was legally perfect. The company existed, the funds existed, the offer was legitimate. just not from who they thought it was from. The day before the hearing, I watched the cameras as Kimberly paced their bedroom like a caged animal. That company is going to buy the house. The judge is going to find him competent. We're going to lose everything. Maybe we should drop the petition, Brandon said weakly. Cut our losses. And then what? He knows we tried to get power of attorney. You think he's going to forgive that? You think he's going to leave you anything after this? She whirled on him. We're already in this. We have to see it through. But if the documents are fake, they won't prove that. Morrison said they were good, professional. How would some judge in Colorado know the difference between real medical documentation and fake? Because, I said softly to my empty study watching them, that judge used to work with actual medical experts for 35 years, and because I'm 3 moves ahead of you. Still. The next morning, the hearing began. Dr. Chen presented her findings. Clean bill of mental health for me. Then she dropped the bomb. The submitted medical documents appeared to be fraudulent, showed inconsistencies and terminology errors that suggested they weren't prepared by actual medical professionals. Hughes stood immediately. Your Honor, Dr. Chen is one evaluator. The documents submitted were prepared by a licensed medical assessor. Named Scott Morrison, Stanley interrupted, standing for the first time. Except there is no licensed medical assessor named Scott Morrison in Colorado, or in any surrounding state. The notary stamp on these documents, also fake. The signature belongs to a man named Marcus Wade, currently on parole for fraud, who has given a sworn statement that he was paid $3,500 by Mrs. Kimberly McDonald to forge these documents. The courtroom went silent. I watched Brandon's face from my seat at the defense table. Watched the color drain away completely, watched his mouth open and close without sound, watched his eyes go wide with the terrible understanding that they'd been caught. Kimberly's reaction was even better. Her practiced composure shattered like dropped glass. Her hands gripped the table in front of her, knuckles going white. She looked at Brandon, then at Hughes, then at the judge, searching desperately for a way out that didn't exist. Judge Martinez's expression had gone from professionally neutral to coldly furious. Mr. Hughes, did you verify these documents before submitting them to my court? Hughes had gone pale too. Your Honor, my clients provided these documents. I had no reason to believe that a medical assessment on your client's father might need verification? Her voice could have frozen nitrogen. Bailiff, I want Mrs. McDonald taken into custody. Charges of fraud, forgery, and perjury. Mr. Brandon McDonald as well. The bailiff moved forward. Brandon looked like he might vomit. Kimberly found her voice, shrill and desperate. This is a mistake. We were trying to protect him. He's not thinking clearly. Mrs. McDonald, the judge said, the only thing not clear here is how you thought you'd get away with submitting forged documents to this court. You'll have plenty of time to think about that in a cell. As they were led away, Brandon looked back at me. Our eyes met across the courtroom. I saw the exact moment comprehension hit him, the moment he realized that I'd known, that I'd planned this, that every step they'd taken had been one I'd guided them toward. I smiled. Not warm, not forgiving, the smile of a chess player who'd just said checkmate. And I hadn't even revealed my final move yet. They posted bail the next morning, $25,000 each, which Brandon had to borrow from his dealership's owner at an interest rate that would have made a loan shark blush. I knew this because Detective Coleman kept me informed of every development. She'd become quite invested in seeing this case through to the end. They're going to fight, she warned me over coffee at a diner near the courthouse. Their lawyer is already spinning this as a misunderstanding, that they were victims of Wade's fraud themselves. Let them fight, I said. I have more ammunition. The day after their release, I received a phone call from Stanley. Mountain Trust is officially withdrawing its offer, citing the fraud investigation. We're putting out a press release stating that the company will not do business with parties under criminal investigation. And the house? Still yours. The fraudulent power of attorney is void. The sale never actually went through, but they're out $11,700 in combined expenses, Wade's fees, and the legal costs of trying to sell your property. He paused. There's something else. I've been going through your credit card statements like you asked. The ones you gave Brandon access to. How much? $47,300 over 8 months. Designer clothes, expensive dinners, a weekend trip to Vegas, car payments on both their Mercedes, all charged to your account. I'd known it was significant. I'd deliberately given them the card, told them to use it for household expenses. Never set a limit, just quietly documented every purchase. File a civil suit. I want every penny back plus damages. Already drafted. We can file this afternoon. The lawsuit hit Brandon and Kimberly like a freight train. I was there when the process server delivered it, watching from my study through the cameras. Brandon read it twice, his face cycling through disbelief, anger, and fear. He's suing us for the credit card charges, he said, his voice hollow. Every purchase we made. He's calling it theft. It's not theft, Kimberly's voice was shrill. He gave us the card. He said to use it. For household expenses? We used it for a trip to Vegas, Kimberly. For your Gucci bags. For Brandon's watch collection. I smiled, watching them. I'd given them just enough rope, and they'd hung themselves with it. 3 days later, the district attorney's office formally charged them both. Attempted murder, fraud, forgery, theft, each charge carrying its own prison sentence. Detective Coleman personally delivered the arrest warrants. This time there was no bail. Judge Martinez, still furious about the forged documents submitted to her court, denied it. These defendants have shown a pattern of deception and attempted fraud, she stated. They pose a flight risk and a danger to the victim. Bail is denied. I attended the arraignment, sat in the back row, watching as they were led in wearing orange jumpsuits. Brandon looked diminished, smaller somehow. Kimberly's Instagram-perfect appearance had crumbled. No makeup, hair pulled back, the veneer of perfection stripped away. Their new attorney stood, Hughes had wisely withdrawn from the case, a man named Derek Hughes. He tried his best. Your Honor, my clients maintain their innocence. The incident in January was a tragic misunderstanding. Mr. Brandon McDonald was attempting to take his father to seek medical help when his vehicle became stuck. The credit card charges were made with permission. The power of attorney documents were obtained in good faith, and my clients were themselves victims of Marcus Wade's fraud. Stanley stood. Your Honor, the prosecution has video evidence that contradicts every one of those claims. Hidden cameras, legally installed by Mr. McDonald in his own home, recorded the defendants planning this fraud over a period of 3 months. We have recordings of Mrs. McDonald specifically saying, and I quote, "If we don't get rid of him now, he'll live another 10 years, and I'm not waiting that long." The courtroom erupted. The judge banged her gavel. Brandon's face had gone the color of old paper. Kimberly was shaking her head, mouthing, "No, no, no," like a mantra. Your Honor, Stanley continued, we request that these recordings be entered into evidence. They show clear premeditation, conspiracy, and intent to harm Mr. McDonald. This wasn't a misunderstanding or an accident. This was calculated attempted murder, followed by fraud when that attempt failed. I watched them truly realize that I'd been recording everything. Every whispered conversation, every scheming session, every moment they thought they were alone, plotting against me. The horror on their faces was more satisfying than any sentence a judge could hand down. That's when Brandon finally looked back into the courtroom, scanning the rows until he found me. Our eyes locked. I didn't smile this time, didn't need to. He saw it anyway. The cold satisfaction, the complete and total victory, the understanding that his father, the man he'd tried to kill, had orchestrated every single move of this game. He mouthed something, I'm not certain, but it looked like, how? I just watched him, letting him wonder. How had I known? How long had I planned this? How far ahead had I seen? The truth was, I'd seen it the moment Kimberly entered our lives, seen the calculation in her eyes, the way she assessed value instead of people. I'd hoped I was wrong. Spent 3 months trying to prove myself wrong. But the cameras didn't lie. Neither did the GPS tracker I'd been carrying since the day I confirmed my suspicions. Neither did the evidence I'd carefully, methodically accumulated. The hearing ended with Brandon and Kimberly remanded to custody pending trial. As they were led away, Kimberly finally broke. This isn't fair. He set us up. He manipulated us. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. She was right, in a way. I had set them up. given them every opportunity to prove me wrong, to show a shred of decency, to choose not to commit fraud and attempted murder. They'd failed that test spectacularly. That evening, I moved out of the hotel I'd been staying in and returned to my house. Brandon and Kimberly's belongings were still scattered throughout the guest rooms. I called a service to box everything up, put it in storage. They could retrieve it after they served their sentences, if they wanted to. I stood in my study, looking at the monitors showing feeds from all the cameras. The house felt quiet, peaceful. For the first time in 8 months, I was alone. Truly alone, without the constant weight of watching my back, of calculating their next move, of playing a game where the stakes were my life. I poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon, my first drink since the night they'd drugged me, raised the glass to the empty room. "Checkmate," I said softly. But the game wasn't quite over yet. The trial began 3 weeks later. Spring had arrived in Denver, bringing with it the kind of weather that made the city bearable. Clear skies, mild temperatures, the promise of renewal. I felt that renewal in my bones. Every morning I woke up without the weight of their presence in my house, without the need to watch my every move, was a gift. The prosecution's case was airtight. Stanley had warned me it would be long, 3 months, maybe 4, as they methodically presented every piece of evidence. But Derek Hughes, Brandon and Kimberly's attorney, wasn't going down without a fight. His opening statement was clever, I had to admit. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is a case about a father and son's relationship that tragically deteriorated. About a young couple who made some poor decisions, yes, but who are not the criminals the prosecution would have you believe. My clients lived with Porter McDonald for 8 months. He gave them permission to use his credit card. He gave them a place to live. And yes, they made mistakes in judgment when they sought help from Marcus Wade. But attempted murder, that requires intent. And the evidence will show that there was no intent to harm Mr. McDonald, only a desperate attempt to help him, which went tragically wrong. It was a good spin, almost made me sound like the villain, the controlling father who'd turned on his struggling son. I watched the jury, saw a few sympathetic faces. Hughes had planted doubt. Now Stanley needed to remove it. The toxicology report came first. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the medical examiner who'd analyzed my blood work that night, testified. The level of Zopiclone in Mr. McDonald's system was consistent with 2 to 3 times the normal prescribed dose. This was not an amount someone would take by accident. It was enough to render him unconscious for 4 to 6 hours. Hughes cross-examined. "But Dr. Martinez, isn't it possible Mr. McDonald took this medication himself? Perhaps he was confused. Took too much?" Zopiclone wasn't prescribed to Mr. McDonald. He has no record of ever being prescribed this medication. The only bottle found was in his son's vehicle, with no prescription label. Could it have been prescribed to his son? Brandon McDonald also has no prescription for Zopiclone on record. The medication appears to have been obtained illegally. Strike one against the defense. The GPS data came next. Detective Coleman walked the jury through my location that night, showing how I'd been driven 47 miles from Denver, then left at a location with no cell phone coverage, no nearby buildings, in sub-zero temperatures. "Mr. Brandon McDonald claims he was taking his father to a hospital," she said, "but the nearest hospital was in the opposite direction. He drove past 3 hospitals to reach this isolated location." Hughes tried to recover. "Detective, isn't it possible Mr. McDonald was confused, disoriented, and Mr. Brandon McDonald didn't know where he was going in the storm. Mr. McDonald made a phone call to Mrs. McDonald during the drive. In that call, which we recovered from phone records, he specifically mentioned the spot and 47 miles out. That suggests premeditation, not confusion. Strike 2. But the video evidence was the death blow. Stanley played it for the jury on the largest screen the courtroom could accommodate. Hours of footage, edited down to the most damning clips. Kimberly and Brandon discussing waiting for the old man to die. Kimberly researching inheritance laws. Their conversation the day before they drugged me. "We can't wait any longer. He's healthier than men, 20 years younger." The jury watched in silence. I watched them watching. Saw the sympathy for Brandon and Kimberly drain away with every recorded word. Then came the conversation I'd captured the night they drugged me. after I'd fallen asleep. The audio was crystal clear. Brandon's voice. Are you sure about this? Kimberly. We've been over this 100 times. It's now or never. He's talking about selling the house, remember? If he does that before he dies, we get nothing. Brandon. But if something goes wrong? Kimberly. Nothing will go wrong. The storm will cover everything. They won't find him until spring, if ever. And by then, we'll be settled. The house will be ours. All of it. The courtroom was absolutely silent when the recording ended. Even Hughes looked shaken. Brandon had his head in his hands. Kimberly sat frozen, staring straight ahead. Ladies and gentlemen, Stanley said quietly, these are not the words of people trying to help. These are the words of people planning murder. Hughes did his best in the following weeks. Brought in a psychologist who testified about folie à deux, shared delusion between two people. Suggested that Kimberly had manipulated Brandon, that he wasn't fully responsible for his actions. Argued that the credit card charges were made with permission, that I'd never set limits or asked them to stop. Mr. McDonald gave my clients access to his credit card, Hughes argued, never once told them there were restrictions, never asked for receipts, never questioned the charges. How were they supposed to know there were limits? Stanley's response was devastating. Your Honor, the defense is arguing that theft isn't theft if the victim doesn't immediately notice. That's absurd. Mr. McDonald trusted his son. That trust was exploited. The fact that he didn't confront them about the charges doesn't make those charges legitimate. The prosecution also revealed something I'd been holding in reserve. Jennifer Richards, the notary who'd witnessed my actual legitimate will, testified that I'd specifically asked her to keep it confidential until my death, or until I authorized its release. Mr. McDonald told me he was concerned about potential inheritance disputes, she said. He wanted to ensure his will couldn't be contested or forged. He was very specific about security measures. When did this meeting take place? Stanley asked. 4 months before the incident in January, September of last year. The implication was clear. I'd been planning my defense for 4 months. I'd known something was coming, had prepared accordingly. The jury saw it. Hughes saw it. Brandon and Kimberly saw it. But Hughes tried one last desperate gambit. He called me to the stand. I'd been expecting this. Stanley had prepared me, but he'd also warned me. They'll try to make you look vindictive, cold, like you set this trap deliberately to destroy your own son. Stay calm, stick to the facts, and remember, you're the victim here. Hughes started soft. Mr. McDonald, you and your son used to have a good relationship, didn't you? We did, when he was younger. What changed? He met Kimberly. His priorities shifted. And you didn't approve of her? I thought she was manipulative and materialistic. I was right. Hughes smiled like I'd given him a gift. So you didn't like your daughter-in-law. And when your son needed help, when he came to you with financial problems, you let him stay in your house. But you also installed hidden cameras to spy on them. I installed cameras after I noticed suspicious behavior. That's not spying. That's protecting myself in my own home. Suspicious behavior, or the behavior of a couple struggling with debt, stressed about their situation. Suspicious behavior like researching how to contest a will, like asking repeatedly about my assets, like having conversations that stopped abruptly when I entered a room. And rather than talk to them about your concerns, you set up an elaborate trap, dangled a fake will, announced a house sale, even arranged for them to meet a con artist who would sell them forged documents. You orchestrated all of this. I looked at him steadily. I documented their crimes. There's a difference. Did you at any point simply ask them if they were planning something? Would you confess to planning murder if someone asked you directly? The jury actually chuckled. Hughes's face tightened. Mr. McDonald, isn't it true that you wanted them to commit these crimes? That you set up every piece of this puzzle specifically so they would fail? I gave them every opportunity to make better choices. They chose poorly, repeatedly. You gave them opportunities to incriminate themselves. I gave them chances to prove me wrong. They could have stopped at any point. Could have said, no, we won't forge documents. No, we won't commit fraud. No, we won't drug my father and leave him to die. I paused, let that sink in. They made those choices themselves. I just made sure there was evidence. Hughes had no response to that. He sat down, and I was dismissed. The trial continued, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The evidence was overwhelming. Video, audio, GPS data, toxicology reports, forged documents, all of it pointing to one inescapable conclusion. Brandon and Kimberly had tried to kill me, and when that failed, had tried to steal from me through fraud. The day the prosecution rested, I sat in the courtroom and finally allowed myself to feel it. Not anger, not even satisfaction, just a deep, bone-tired relief. It was almost over. The game I'd been playing for 8 months was in its final moves. Stanley leaned over. "The jury will deliberate tomorrow. We should have a verdict within a week. And after that? After that, you can finally rest." I nodded, but rest felt a long way off. There were still moves left to play. The jury deliberated for 3 days. 3 days of waiting, of second-guessing, of wondering if somehow, despite everything, Brandon and Kimberly might find a way to slip through the cracks. Stanley assured me the case was solid, but I'd seen juries do strange things, seen guilty people walk free on technicalities, seen evidence that seemed ironclad get dismissed, because one juror decided they didn't like the prosecutor's tie. But on the afternoon of the 3rd day, the call came. Verdict reached. The courtroom was packed when we reconvened. News of the case had spread. Federal judge's son tries to murder him for inheritance. The kind of story that draws spectators like moths to flame. I took my seat in the front row, Stanley beside me. Brandon and Kimberly were led in, still in their orange jumpsuits. They looked diminished, broken almost. Almost. The jury filed in, 12 faces, carefully neutral. The foreman, a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair, held a piece of paper that contained Brandon and Kimberly's fate. Judge Martinez addressed the jury. "Have you reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." "On the charge of attempted murder in the 1st degree against Brandon McDonald, how do you find?" "Guilty." Brandon's face went absolutely white. Kimberly made a sound like something inside her had cracked, but the foreman wasn't done. "On the charge of fraud against Brandon McDonald, how do you find?" "Guilty." "On the charge of forgery against Brandon McDonald?" "Guilty." "On the charge of theft against Brandon McDonald?" "Guilty." 4 charges, 4 guilty verdicts. The foreman turned to Kimberly's charges next. The result was identical. Guilty on all counts. Every single one. The courtroom erupted. Martinez banged her gavel, calling for order, but it took several minutes. I sat quietly, watching Brandon and Kimberly as the reality crashed over them like a tsunami. Brandon was shaking his head slowly, mechanically, as if by denying it, he could make it untrue. Kimberly had collapsed forward, her face in her hands, shoulders heaving with sobs. Hughes requested immediate sentencing be delayed, asked for time to prepare mitigation arguments. Martinez denied it. These defendants have shown no remorse, no acceptance of responsibility. Sentencing will occur in 2 weeks. As they were led away, Brandon looked back one final time, found me in the crowd. His eyes held a question, the same one he'd been asking since this began. "How could you do this to your own son?" I held his gaze, didn't answer, didn't need to. He'd done this to himself. The 2 weeks between verdict and sentencing were strange, quiet. I spent them in my house, the one they'd tried to steal, going through decades of accumulated life. Photos of Brandon as a child, report cards, little drawings he'd made me, all the evidence of the boy he'd been before greed and Kimberly's influence had twisted him into someone I didn't recognize. I didn't keep any of it. Boxed it all up, marked it with his prison number, because that's what he'd have now, a number instead of a name, and arranged for it to be stored. Maybe someday, years from now, he'd want it. Or maybe he'd spend 18 years understanding that the past was gone, burned to ash by his own choices. The sentencing hearing was shorter than the trial. Hughes made his arguments. Brandon's lack of prior criminal record, the influence Kimberly had exerted, the possibility of rehabilitation. Stanley countered with the severity of the crimes, the premeditation, the fact that Brandon had literally left his own father to die in a snowstorm. "Your Honor," Stanley said, "Mr. Brandon McDonald didn't just commit attempted murder. He committed it against the man who gave him life, who raised him, who took him in when he needed help. That level of betrayal deserves the maximum penalty under law." Martinez agreed. When she delivered the sentences, her voice was hard as granite. Brandon McDonald, you are hereby sentenced to 18 years in the Colorado Department of Corrections. Kimberly McDonald, 15 years. Additionally, you are jointly and severally liable for $547,300 in restitution to Porter McDonald, representing emotional distress damages, legal fees, and stolen funds. Brandon's attorney asked about the restitution. Your Honor, my clients are indigent. They can't possibly pay that amount. Then their assets will be seized and sold. Whatever remains unpaid will be a debt they carry for the rest of their lives. The two Mercedes they'd been so proud of, the designer clothes, the jewelry Kimberly had bought with my credit card, all of it seized, auctioned off. The total came to $127,000, a fraction of what they owed, but something. After the hearing, as the courtroom cleared, I walked toward where Brandon stood with his guards. Stanley tried to stop me, but I waved him off. I needed to say this, needed him to hear it. I stopped a few feet away. Brandon looked at me with red-rimmed eyes, his face a mask of misery and hate in equal measure. Did you ever stop to think, I said quietly, that all of this could have been avoided? That you could have simply waited, lived your life, and eventually inherited everything you wanted? That if you'd just been patient, just been decent, you would have gotten it all anyway? He stared at me. But that wasn't enough for you. You couldn't wait. Couldn't be kind to an old man for a few more years. Had to take it now. Had to take it by force. I leaned closer. I spent 35 years putting people like you behind bars. People who thought they were clever enough to beat the system. And you know what? Not one of them was as clever as they thought. Not one. You set us up, he said, his voice hoarse. You manipulated everything. I gave you choices. You made bad ones. I straightened. 18 years, Brandon. 18 years to think about what you did. To think about how you left your own father to freeze to death in the snow. To think about every decision that led you to this moment. I turned to walk away, then paused. Looked back. You thought you could outplay me? You really did. But son, I taught you chess when you were 7 years old. And even then, you never could see more than one move ahead. The guard pulled him away before he could respond. I watched him go, this stranger who'd once been my child, and felt nothing but tired. Outside the courthouse, Detective Coleman was waiting. Justice served, she said simply. Justice, I agreed. Finally. The house sold 6 weeks later for $2.3 million, this time to a real buyer, a young tech entrepreneur from California, looking for Colorado mountain property. I signed the papers in Jennifer Richards' office, the same notary who'd witnessed my real will all those months ago. You sure about this? She asked as I initialed the final page. This is your home. Was my home, I corrected. Now it's just a building full of bad memories. Time to start fresh. I moved to Boulder a week after the sale closed. Bought a small house on a quiet street, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, nothing fancy. Cost me $680,000. The rest of the money, over $1.5 million after taxes and fees, I split 3 ways. $500,000 to a foundation that helps elderly victims of domestic abuse. $500,000 to a legal